Hey everyone, I'm Nick, and welcome to another episode of Learning C++ 20. So in this episode of the series, we're going to be looking at one of the major language changes coming in C++ 20, which are these constraints and concepts. So one of the biggest problems and one of the biggest things that people don't like about C++ is the fact that the error messages that we get with templates can be very, very long and very difficult to actually debug. Right, so what this idea of constraints and concepts does is it allows us to boil down and limit what's able to be instantiated by a certain template. So we can constrain the instantiation of a template to some concepts, right? So there's a number of default concepts or standard library concepts that we can use. So here's some of the core language ones. So they're same as, derived from, convertible to. And then what we're going to be looking at today are these integral, signed integral, unsigned integral, these types of concepts, and we'll show a practical example of where that helps. So let's go ahead and go into the code. So the first thing that we're going to do is let's look at our JThreads example from last time. And I showed this stop token example. So this was using a JThread and showing how we could request the stopping of a thread after instantiation. And we inside of here, right, we had this sleep, right? So we use stood this thread, sleep for, and some amount of seconds, right? So let's say that we want to maybe clean up this code and maybe we just want to turn this into a function just for sleeping, right? So we can just call sleep instead of this big long stood this thread sleep for, and then stood chrono seconds, right? So let's go ahead and see how we do that. So here I'll go into concepts and I'll go to this, I'll open this stop token. So I've basically replaced that line with a templated function called sleepfunc, right? And so it, just like a normal function, we use type name t, and then t being the type is basically how long, or in this num being how long we want to sleep for, right? So this is what we're going to pass for seconds. So more accurately, this is sleep seconds, right? So how many seconds do we want to sleep? So one of the very easy mistakes that we could make here is if we go ahead and pull back up the C++, if we actually pull up the stood chrono duration, we see that with seconds, what it actually takes is a signed integer of at least 35 bits, right? And you see all of these nanoseconds, microseconds, milliseconds, etc. They all take these signed integers, right? So the problem here is, what if we don't really know that, from the start? It would be very easy for me to think of, okay, well, sleep function, I want to sleep for maybe some number of seconds. Maybe I want to sleep for 1.5 seconds. That seems like a very intuitive thing to do. So we'll go ahead and we'll save that. And let's go ahead and compile this without using concepts first. So I'll just use G++ on stop token. Remember, I'll be using stood C++ 2a, basically C++ 20. And we'll link against pthread because we're using JThreads here. So we'll compile this, and I get this big long error that looks pretty messy. So here I've got, instantiation of sleepfunc where t is a double, and it says no matching call for stood chrono duration long int, duration double, which is right here in this call to sleep for seconds. And then it looks like I've got another error here where it says, within type traits, no name type instruct stood enable if false void. You get kind of the idea. We end up getting this very long error, which basically boils down to the fact that we can't pass a double into that sleep, right? It has to be this signed integral type, right? So what's a way we can make this better? So instead of just having our template take an arbitrary type, let's go ahead and constrain it, right? So instead of having an arbitrary type, instead of type name t, we can say stood signed integral, right? So we can instead use this concept, and you see that if we go back here, it's one of the available concepts we have. Down here, signed integral, right? Which basically does two checks. Does a check of is integral and is signed. So both of these together have to be true. So let's go ahead and go back here. This is all we need to change, and let's see the error message we get when we compile now, right? So we'll go ahead and compile, and now we get a very small, very clean error. Right, so you see that it says error, use of void void sleep func with t equal double with unsatisfied constraints. Right, so there's our constraints. So down here it just says which concept was violated. So it said the expression is integral evaluated to false. Basically, when we try to do this function right with a double, it evaluated to false. So there's a very easy way that we can see, hey, we cleaned up our error messages a ton by using concepts, right? And we can write our own custom concepts as well. We don't just have to use the ones that are provided in the standard library, right, in the concepts header. You can also define your, go ahead and define your own for whatever particular circumstance you have. But they're a great way to, really help with program development, where now you don't have these very long, messy template instantiations to kind of dig through and see what went wrong, right? We can basically use these constraints to very easily set, hey, what am I allowed to actually instantiate this templated function with? So that's going to go ahead and do it for this video. It's a brief introduction to concepts. We'll go over more later in terms of writing our own concepts. So right now, this is only supported in GCC 10, or rather in GCC, it's only supported in GCC 10. So other compilers will have support for this at a later date. GCC 10 is still also experimental right now. It's not fully released yet, but you can go ahead and download that from the source. But that's going to go ahead and do it for this video. As always, you can check out any of this code at github.com/coffeebeforearch. So if we go under repositories and C++20 samples, you can find this example of concepts right here. So feel free to download this, play around with it, and let me know if you have any questions. And as always, I'm Nick, and I hope you have a nice day.